The Prod Box brings experiences from myself, industry professionals, colleagues, senior leaders, and discussions on key topics within the product management and technology space from a player and coaching point of view, aiming to help us all learn and succeed in building great product management teams, resulting in great software products. So welcome and enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe or join our mailing list at theprodbox.co.uk. Everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of The Prod Box, Lessons Learned in Product Management. Now, this episode is a little different to our usual as I'm joined by a lovely panel with a lot of years combined product experience. So today we're going to delve into those experiences and talk about some of their lessons learned in product management to help you try to avoid these pitfalls or help you get out of them. So without further ado, I will let my panel introduce themselves, and we'll start with Ross. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Ross.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I host the Product Coach podcast, and I've been building digital products for over 25 years. I've been in product for around 15. I'm also a member of a mentoring group called Mentor Camp, where we mentor, well, right now we've mentored dozens of startups around the world. I've also worked with really large companies like IBM and, down to startups. I do a lot of speaking and coaching in the product space, and that's me. Looking forward to hearing about everybody else.
Hi everyone, I'm Nikki Karyapa. I am a senior product owner at Big Hand. Big Hand are primarily into productivity and profitability software for legal, and I'm primarily working on the workflow management side of things. And prior to this, I've been a product owner with Vodafone and at Nokia, and looking forward to this discussion.
Hi everyone, so I'm Martin. I'm currently the head of product at Pivigo, which is a data science startup, but I'm actually a psychologist. I've done startups in the data science and chatbot space, and I'm also a product coach and consultant.
Hi everyone, thanks Lucinda for having me in this panel. I'm really excited to be here with you today. And I'm currently Global Senior Product Manager at HSBC, and I'm partly responsible from the digital experience for our HSBC customers, existing customers across web and mobile globally. Before that, I worked in healthcare, media, fintech, finance sectors, and in different size of companies, startups, medium, and corporate organizations as well throughout my career. Apart from my current day-to-day job, one of the things I love about doing is actually adding to the community, and one of the reasons why we are probably all here today. I'm also an instructor at product school, and I also mentor product managers. I love spending time with product managers, so I'm really happy to be here with you today, and I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's challenges as well.
Hi everyone, I'm very pleased to be here. I am Gary Kangai. I've only recently actually been working in product in the last couple of years at moonpig.com, the online card and gifts retailer, which excitingly earlier this month in February was the first UK IPO of the year. But previous to being a product manager there, I was working with a couple of organisations who are venture arms. So Ordnance Survey's venture arm called Geovation, Oxygen House, an investment group based in the southwest of England's venture arm called Extra Velocities. And I was a program manager leading their accelerator programs for data and tech-based startups, the ones who are looking for venture backing and have got ambitious scale-up plans. And even though they've been working with them on a spectrum of things, from investment readiness and legals to marketing, it was really the product element which I loved the most. So I decided to double down on that. And I was very lucky to then pivot and join Moonpig Group. And most recently, since the end of 2020, I've joined the BBC's design and engineering function. This is where all of its digital products sit. And actually, I'm taking a bit of an abstraction away from product for the time being as an associate engineer, which is a personal move I decided to make to strengthen my understanding on the technical side, since product in the technology world is something I want to be in for a very long time.
Jamie Coker. I'm a technical product manager at Iris Limited. I've worked in product for a couple of years now. Started off as a QA, so before I moved into product. Been doing product for 5-6 years now, and yeah, I've worked in different areas, healthcare, worked in social media with a company called AppScatter, and now into fintech with Iris. That's me.
Thank you all again for joining me on this panel episode today. Now, you've all shared with me lessons learned that you would like to discuss today, which we are going to delve into and ask you a little bit more about your experiences. But I wanted to kick it off with some of my experiences, which is mainly derived from B2B businesses. And when entering into a business that might be in a period of change, or they're finding their feet on how to do product management right, they're more often than not a number of hurdles to overcome. And this will be the case for large B2Cs, B2Bs, startups, and the types of hurdles will certainly be different for each organization, but they'll certainly be there. And one of my lessons learned is, as product professionals, the roles we play differ from business to business, and we interact with a number of peoples or number of type of stakeholders. So from CEOs, founders, ops board members, super users, our actual users, just to name a few. And these interactions sometimes result in specific feature requests, product pivots, or similar. But I'd say question, and be confident in doing so. Otherwise, you'll spend a lot of time and energy building something that actually doesn't carry much value, either from an ROI perspective, overall value to your users or customer base, or the business. You'll blink and a lot of time may have gone by and you've delivered something that doesn't satisfy your user, the user problem, or the product direction, or all of the above. Often you might feel pressure to deliver on the various wants, but in order to relieve the pressure and satisfy the needs of the user, data and research are your friends, and having a clear product strategy closely aligned with your business goals is also very important. Now, Esin, this is very closely related to one of the lessons learned that you would like to share today, which is about know your why and confirming your assumptions. Tell us a bit about this and what the impact is if you don't know your why.
Yeah, thanks, Lucinda. Actually, as you mentioned, product managers are there for a reason, and we are working to create products and the products that are doing the right thing. And that's our biggest differentiator, even if it's your own company, maybe you're building your own startup, or maybe you're working in a really established business as well. So it's still, you have the same role, your responsibilities might be different, but as you mentioned, we need to ask these questions a lot, question all the things that are happening around, whether it's a product decision, a business decision. So and some of the things that I hear from other product managers is that we might not be influencers directly to some of the decisions, but still questioning these things would help us to make the right decisions for our products. And we are generally, I haven't, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't heard or seen any product managers saying, actually, I have that spare time. How should I use that time? Can I just spare some time and work on something else? We are generally rushing things and, really being on hands-on, tactical as well. But we also have to make time for being a bit strategical, taking a step back and asking the question, which is like, why are we doing this in the first place? Why are we building this feature? It can be even just a really small thing. It can be even a bug, or it can be even a story. If we can't answer that why question, then we are actually working on something which is called assumption. So assumptions are fine as long as we know they are assumptions. And sometimes we have to accept we are making assumptions and test these things out. But if we are not aware of these assumptions, and if we are just going with the flow and not questioning these things, then we make wrong decisions. That means maybe in the short term, we might get some success scenarios. And you can see in the startup world, I know there are some panelists, please add anything from your own experience as well. Generally speaking, for the first 2 years in startups, if there's a product market fit, they become successful, and then a sudden decline has been seen because actually there isn't any like a purpose or a why behind why they've been created. But if you look at the really successful products or the companies, they survive and they stay in product growth phase for about 5 years because they already identify these whys, the main purpose of what they're doing and why they're doing this. And I'll add maybe a note here for those that want to learn more about it. Simon Sinek actually has a really nice TED talk about that, starting with why. And he also explains this. I'll briefly explain. Most of the companies actually, looking at all the professionals, generally speaking, there's always like we know what to build and how to build, and we have these skill sets as well. But the most successful ones are actually the ones questioning the why and having that why embedded into their products, their teams. And even you can think about yourself. Why are you a product manager? You have passions, and generally product managers are passionate people but in terms of, as we are talking about product concept, maybe just a tip there as well. If you're working even on tactical things, such as like stories, features, you're trying to, be really tactical. Still, there's something called 5 whys, which is actually you ask a why question 5 times in order to identify the root cause, the real why behind it. And if you can't find an answer after these questions, that means that actually you don't really have to spend time on it. Maybe you have to go back and identify, we are making an assumption here. Do you really need to go into that route and question a bit more, get maybe more data, or accept that as an assumption and build your MVP or risk assumption testing so that you can validate it as well. The second point I'd like to make here is more from the communication side of things, because as product managers, even if we might be great at building amazing products, if we lack communication skills, still that wouldn't work well for us. So I believe that having that why, which is more kind of like a vision or the purpose, would also help us to align all the teams and create shared understanding among all stakeholders as well. So I've been using it as well from all the companies I worked on. Even if someone working on that team day to day, if you ask that person, why are you working on this ticket? And if he can or she can answer that question, then you actually communicated well enough. They are aware of all of these why. So it also creates motivation. This is more of a human psychological point of view that we want to understand why we're working on things. So that's the third aspect, to create teams that are well functioning, motivated as well. So if we all know why we're doing something, why we are building these products, we are also motivated to work towards any challenges that might come. So that's the third point I'd like to make in this context.
Well, a lot of the times you don't have data. Like, how are you going to test something out of the blue? If you're working on a really old product, in a mature product, then you have all those users, you have all those data, or have all those insights. Startups, often all you have is assumptions. And you have to find really quick and clever and guerrilla ways to test them to make sure that you're even providing value.
I think that the why, knowing your why and those assumptions, it transcends like almost any level of a product company, from startup through to a fairly mature company. Because at first, Essen, when you're talking about purpose and you kind of wrapped up with motivation ultimately, I always found that there were 2 types of entrepreneurs. The ones which were opportunistic and they thought, okay, we could innovate in this space and make pretty good money and a really good venture out of it. And those people who personally experienced a problem and they genuinely, it kept them up awake at night, and they wanted to solve it. They thought, why don't we just solve this for everyone? And there's a level, very, very early stage, where that makes a very, very compelling story when you're pitching to others, like that why. But then, say, further down the line, where you don't necessarily need to have like an emotional, personal story, down to the bug level that you mentioned, like, I suppose then the why then transfers to less of maybe higher level purpose, but simply validating everything. I think as a product person, if you can get into the rhythm of constantly doing that for even the small things like at the bug level, it becomes a bit more natural to lead product teams, being able to make it clear to everyone, like, why are we all doing this? I myself, I'm very kind of early career, but I myself have, over different companies I worked at, just found it so impactful. Like, you can be kind of going, like, stagnating or going down into a bit of a rut, and you only need like a senior leader to like bring everyone together and just remind everyone of the wider vision and purpose, and suddenly you just get so much more of a pep in your step about what you're doing. It's really, really impactful.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing your experiences. Definitely, I agree.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. So just to touch on the knowing your why and assumptions, I just wanted to bring in Nikki's lessons learned, which is to be curious and keep it simple. I think when looking at assumptions, this is quite key and it's very closely related. So do you want to explore more on that lesson for us?
Yep, absolutely, Lucinda. And as in just continuing on your lesson learned, I think being curious is so important in getting to know your why itself. As a product manager, you need to develop that curiosity. I think curiosity is everything. You need to be curious about customers. We need to be focused on making products to help people. We need to realize that this is a process that's not so much about us, it's about everyone else. And there's a huge difference when we do talk to customers in what they say, what the customer is saying, and what they actually mean. Because they ask for feature X, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they want that new feature. You need to dig deeper into it and find out why. What problem are they looking to have solved? We need to be curious as product managers, be like a child, ask questions, ask stupid questions if that's what it takes to get to the bottom of it. And I think curiosity is more about the willingness to get to the absolute root cause of the problem. It isn't something. It is something that we need to, relentlessly try and understand the why, and continuously ask these questions and zero in on the problem. We need to probe for more details and data points, and that kind of enables us as PMs to understand the constraints and then effectively strategize and formulate a solution to our customers. And we need to understand problems from all angles, and we want to gather information from various different resources, and also understand how these outcomes have an impact on our success. At any point when you're new to a company, you're new to a particular product, or you're new to a process, I think you need to be curious about how it works. You need to have that burning desire to know everything about it, and then that's when you get to the underlying problems that it has, and that kind of helps us improve it. With time, you then get to understanding more and more about it, and then your problem statement itself becomes more defined, and you begin to think about all the possible solutions that comes with it. And as product managers, I think you need to have a genuine interest in learning about not just your product or your customers, but knowing the market, the customer needs, the newer technologies, the trends that come along, everything to do with this. And as product managers, we need to be continuously learning and adapting and evolving. And I think for me personally, the more I dig and delve more into the processes and the products and the people around, that's my key to understanding it better and getting to the problems even better. So I think staying endlessly curious, it just helps open your mind, learn new things. You need to ask questions, dig deeper, and overall, I think curiosity is just a good thing. And Lucinda, I know you love Jeff Bezos quotes, so I looked up a quote on curiosity for this one. So yeah. And there is a Jeff Bezos quote for this, and he says, "Remember to wander and let curiosity be your compass." So I think that fits in really well in terms of product management as a whole and product people as a whole. So I think that is one of my biggest lessons learned.
Fantastic. And you have to be curious. If you're not curious, then you're never going to explore avenues then you might never have explored if you weren't curious, I think. And delving into the data and delving into the research and delving further into what your customers, the market, are telling you, and really exploring the problem as well.
So with keeping it simple, I think, again, this is another one of my biggest lessons learned. And it's way on early on in my product journey itself. I came across this principle of the KISS principle, which is keep it simple, stupid, right? And the basic principle, the underlying concept of it is that your system and your designs and your product needs to be as simple as possible. And you just avoid complexity as a whole. It's easy to just assume that simple, stupid implies that it's unintelligent and just thoughtless, but I think at the core of it, it's quite the opposite. And to have methodologies which are simple, you need to put more thought into it, and you need to think of the bigger picture on the long run. It needs to be scalable. And simplicity just refers to the entire customer experience as a whole, whether it's product information or web design or a transaction process. It's everything. And there are various different studies that show, if you're giving too many options to a user, they're more dissatisfied than happy about it. When they come across a shelf in a supermarket with like 25 odd varieties of jam, they're more unlikely to pick up a bottle of jam when they're shown just 4 or 5 flavors in the supermarket. So it's interesting and it's difficult at the same time. And when in doubt, you just keep it simple. But what happens if you're wrong? No big deal. You just readjust, you continue to move forward. That's it. You don't need to make it super complicated overall. And I think more often than not, even we have fallen into the situation where we're trying to cater to one customer's needs and we're trying to customize and provide all the different solutions to them. And on the long run, we've just lost out on the opportunity to get many of the other customers because we've just made it too complicated. We've just catered to that one solution and given them all the options in that one solution, and it's just lost opportunity. So I think keeping it simple is really, really important. It's difficult, but it is extremely important.
Absolutely. And in episode 5 of the Podbox, which is UX in product management, have a listen if you haven't already. We did touch on this and talking about having a simple UX. A good UX is an interface that a user doesn't actually know that they're using, which is kind of weird when you really think about it in that perspective. But it's true. You don't have to think about how you use something. If you can just use it, that means you're doing something right. So definitely key with looking at UX and user interface design as well. Fantastic. So I wanted to go on to having a clear vision and cutting down the scope, because Jamie, see, one of your lessons learned, I think that is key, because you can gather all the data. You've got all your assumptions, you do all your research, you talk to your customers, you research the market, you have all of this lovely data and input into what you want to do and how you want to improve your product, or how the direction you want to take your product into. But cutting down the scope, why is that important? Why is that a lessons learned for you?
Thank you, listener, for this opportunity to talk. So I think it's just come out over a period of time as a product manager now, product ownership at some point. You learn that basically having a clear vision, I'll start off with that, is essential to any product to get it into the market. Many a times, and I've worked in different, both startup and now a larger organization who's been around, a lot of products die because their vision is too big. It's too vague. They want something to be out there, but they can't really, get to the crux of it. They have so many good ideas. There's so many feedback and information and data they've collected, but it's not clear enough. And when it starts to become into implementation, it becomes a problem because you start seeing all the cracks in what they're trying to do. And they always try to pivot or change it in between, where it becomes scope creep. There's a lot of changing in the scope. That means it never gets out to the market, and it keeps on going until a point the actual product or the design dies off. So you need to keep the vision very clear, let everyone understand, as we were talking about, Essen has mentioned, and everyone else, the why. You keep that why very clear, very simple, that anyone that's picking up the work or anyone trying to do it has, even the stakeholders can understand it in a quick glance. Strategically, when you set it, basically you set your vision, you make it as simple as it can be, that the stakeholders can hold on to it at every point of when you're trying to deliver it. They understand what you're trying to deliver. They have that clear vision of what the end goal is. So they can always have it as a reference point of anytime you push something to the market, be it an MVP or be it something small out there, there's always an end goal. They know what the vision is for this. And they're cutting down of scope. As a product manager, most of us know that sometimes you overpromise. You get a lot of pressure from leadership or stakeholders or customers asking for this feature or that feature. And you start, piling up workload or many features when you're trying to deliver, a product out there. And you have to understand when to tell the customer or the stakeholder, actually, this thing has to take a back foot for its time being. You have to understand the reason why they want something at that time. Everyone wants it now, as a product manager. I think everyone has experienced that. There's no stakeholder you go to. Everything's top priority. Everything needs to be done well. So you need to actually understand the reason behind it. Ask all those questions you need to find out, and then prioritize your work, and then cut your scope down to what can be achieved. Because if you can't cut it down, then you get into situations that you never achieve your main goal. And then you keep on chasing your foot, as they say, you're chasing your tail. You keep on going around in circles and you never deliver. So you must have the ability to go to your stakeholders and tell them, okay, at this point, we need to come down at this requirement, push it to the side, and stick to that clear vision of what you are trying to deliver in that time scales you've had. Without that, you will never deliver anything to the market. And worst of all, you might deliver something that customers don't want because you keep on adding extra bits which complicate the product. So that's what I'll say. Yes.
What I would just pick up on that, Jamie, and it's one of my favourite lessons learned that was sent in by Gary, was you don't need to be a super forecaster. Favourite line, and I just think it's very closely related to the cutting down of scope, because you can't know everything up front. And I think most of us work in an agile environment, that breeds agility. You have to be quite flexible. You kind of create the picture as you go. You don't know the whole picture and then build it. So it's basically trying to allow for change and have that iterative process, which is the same for when you're building a product and when you're thinking about the scope of it. You want to deliver little and often. Make sure your MVP or MMP delivers value, of course, but you don't have to cram everything in, because you want to test it and you want to iterate your product. So I wanted to go on to Gary and talk a little bit about not being a super forecaster.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Jamie, for sharing your experiences. I thought they were so interesting, and particularly with keeping the scope creep low and be able to say no. I also feel like that ties into like trust that you have your stakeholders, and kind of building into that trust bank when times are tough and you have to say no and all of that. But yeah, super forecasting. So I don't know whether any of you are here. You clearly have far more years of experience than I do, but there are definitely these people, and they're very rare, who seem to be super forecasters. Like, they can tell you, don't even bother going down that route. Like, it's going to be a lost cause. We've done this thousands of times before. And when I was at Moonpig, we had an advisor who'd worked with several of these top tech giant companies, was one of the original product managers for Google Maps. And we could soundboard with him like every couple of months, and it was helpful for kind of not going down the wrong routes. But that's great. What happens like the rest of the time when it's just you and you're clearly not a super forecaster? And I don't think many of us are. I suppose where this lesson kind of stemmed from was a bit of a pitfall problem that I suppose people have if you're in a company, in a product company where things are going relatively well. And Moonpig definitely succeeded all the more in the pandemic, but it wasn't just that; it was a successful company anyway for 20 years prior. When things have been going well, and therefore going back to assumptions, we make a deduction that the way that we've been doing things is the right way, so let's keep on doing it, and let's not go beyond that. So you're kind of in this rut, like you are a success, but at the same time, you're gradually becoming more and more risk averse. And we came to a point where we were going through a replatforming. So this was changing to a newer tech stack. And this meant it was an ideal time to revisit simple bread and butter things that people would expect of an e-commerce, like a really good accessible website, simple user flow from homepage through to navigation through to baskets. So there are many kind of A/B experiments we had run, which were likely to be a success, but we just ran them anyway. And they would make quite a lot of, they would make sometimes even just a small increase in conversion rates or average order value and annualized revenue would actually be a lot. And we kind of became a bit used to just success after success after success. And getting into a position where we were almost running experiments that we knew were going to go well, but we just wanted to prove to the business, to leadership, that we were right. And we wanted to bank how much money that makes so that we can mark our progress against the company goals and OKRs. So this kind of started with a problem with then not kind of shunning ideas that were kind of different to that path. When something would come along, there was definitely that risk aversion. And we had talked with other PM teams, and we suddenly kind of came to this conclusion, sort of over like a period of time of kind of realizing this and almost self-diagnosing, not that any individual was to blame, but that this was definitely a culture that was happening, that we would far prefer to be far more experimental and bold with ideas, run, say, 15 experiments within a given time, rather than one that we could really bank on. And I think the notion of super forecasting is that no, not everyone can be that, but what really matters is just learning from patterns and just refining your strategies continuously. That it's okay to be wrong. There's always going to be a margin for uncertainty, but so long as you are right more times than wrong, and not being wedded to being right. So I like to make parallels with how I started off my career in the kind of startup worlds. But also there are other parallels of other things. So say you take trading, which is again another very fascinating area, like the stock market, huge uncertainty, very unpredictable. There is this very famous trading entrepreneur called John Carter. He's hilarious, but also in a very poignant way. And he has a phrase. He says, to be a successful trader, you can be right or you can make money. And I almost think that the same is in product as well. Obviously, theoretically, that makes no sense. Obviously, like if you are right, the successes come. But in terms of your approach, like the conscious attitudinal choice you take and your mindset, that we don't want to be wedded to being right, but we're just going to be experimental. And kind of like what Nikki said, being like a child and willing to continuously learn, and not falling into a rut that just because things are going right, that we have to keep things that way.
I think you're right. I think it's you have to be comfortable with a level of uncertainty. You can't know everything. And I think that's the beauty of product management as well. You have to be an explorer. and you have to be comfortable with that exploration. Of course, we have business goals, we have revenue that we want to make, we have targets that we want to hit. We often have deadlines as well, especially in larger enterprise organizations. But yeah, definitely uncertainty is key. Which kind of brings me on to, Ross, one of the points that you mentioned, which is actually sometimes you need to move on from problems that you actually can't solve. I love that. And I really want to hear more.
Yeah, sure. So look, I think when it comes to product management, it's so easy to generalize, right? You say things. I'm trying to avoid saying things that people haven't said, so they don't think I'm trying to pick on that. But like look at the data, do this, do that. It's so easy to generalize, but really, we shouldn't be, because everybody's context is different. I just loved that comment that you just said about that stockbroker, and it's awesome. It's a great soundbite. But I think everybody's context is so different, and it's also really easy to get stuck in these generalities where some things just aren't possible. And I realize right now I'm just talking in generalities, so I'll try to give you some specific examples, right? And like Jamie was saying, we overpromise sometimes as product managers, and that also really got me thinking. And I think it's also really about us as product managers. I see us as leaders too, right? Sometimes we do need to push back, going to what you're saying, and sometimes we've got to leave. And it's a lot of the time it's not about the data. At best, if we're lucky, we get some 70% data, but then there's a huge part of us that means we need to actually make a decision. And the leadership bit gets forgotten so easily because it's really hard, like very, very hard. That's where as product managers, we need to have the empathy and the humility to go along with the curiosity and all the what I call the hard skills. The hard skills are like let's do multivariate testing, let's do A/B testing, let's do that kind of stuff. Let's look into the data. But the soft skills are the things that really, really get forgotten sometime. And I think that if you can't push back and get buy-in, sometimes you just got to really leave. It's like it's just not going to work out. So, for example, it's great to say things like, we've got to put the customer first. But at a lot of companies, they'll say it, but they just won't do it. And they won't do it. They're not going to do it. They'll tell you they're going to do it. They'll tell you they love the customers. But their actions don't play that out based on some of us as product people who are super passionate about customers. I've worked and I've coached at lots of places, big or small, and everyone will tell you, yeah, we put the customer first. Not everybody will do it in the way that is real, So I think environment is so important. If a lot of us in this call, we've been talking about best practices, and you've got to have a supportive environment to be able to really use those best practices. And like I say, a lot of companies, just don't do it. And I see that as well as a leadership problem as well. I remember working with a guy who was a CPO for a large investment bank, and one of the things that they didn't have is they didn't have the leadership coverage to be able to enable them to do it. And as soon as they replaced the CEO, and I remember working at a company where I released a product where it grew from nothing to $50 million turnover in 9 months from ideation. It was absolutely brilliant. Everybody thought it was great. I was a bit of a wonder child for a little bit. CEO changed, and then boom, I went from being the golden child to being the forgotten stepchild that nobody wanted around there, right? And it was amazing because within probably 6 weeks I remember they made the head of graphic design, they made her the head of product, and people really struggled with her. And within probably 5 or 6 weeks of her getting this role, about 4 of the senior product managers and I think 2 heads of product had resigned. Now, they would never resign and say they just don't like working there. They resign and go, I found a better opportunity, it's better for my career and all that crap. But the reality is, they wouldn't be honest about it. And I'm not even clear that I'd be honest about it in that case, because what does it really help? You're just kind of being confrontational. But in that position, it was 100% about the leadership. Leadership changed, culture changed, boom, it was different. For example, the example of the person at Moonpig, who's that kind of super forecaster, I would be the annoying guy in the room who'd be kind of pushing back and going, yeah, but that was then, or how do you know that, or where's it documented, how do we do that? And also when you get into this 5 whys, because listen, the 5 whys irritate the hell out of anybody if you say them as 5 whys. It just depends how you kind of structure that, right? Obviously, really, the point isn't whether it's 5 whys or 4 whys. It's how do you get to the point of what the real problem is, and ignore the surface thing, and get to the real problem. And I've joined organizations where people come, oh no, we tried that, we tried this, and we tried that, and sometimes you got to go, listen, I can't make an impact here. I got to leave. And I think the other thing we don't do is a lot of the time, and I was talking about doing hard things, and what I'm going to talk about really sucks for a lot of people I coach, but it's one of the ways it really accelerates their career. And I've got a colleague of mine who's ex-Google in the States, huge product, and he does the same thing with the guys that he coaches. And it's really about getting feedback on the role. A lot of the times what I used to do, and with the people I coach, I'll ask them to send a form and ask the people that they just presented to what they thought about the talk or the presentation. I don't mean like sending an NPS and giving a 7 out of 10. It's more like, so what do you think about X, Y, and Z? And a lot of the time you'll say, hey, I presented this and this is what we all communicated. Do you understand it? And everyone's going to nod their head and say, yeah. And then when you ask them, so what did you think of X? You'll realize that the communication that you thought you were doing, and everybody was telling you, yeah, this is great, and it makes sense. And you're like, yeah, I understand, I'm on board. And then we say, okay, cool, here's a form. Why don't you just fill it out? Give me some feedback. And that is also one way where I see people really accelerate their careers, is that they can start seeing what the actual meaning of the communication is, as opposed to assuming that, which is, like I say, it's really, really hard to get people to do that. It might sound like a good idea, it might sound like a bad idea, but it's really hard to get people to do it. But I've seen career acceleration happen really quickly there. And yeah, sometimes it just sucks. Sometimes you're at a company and, I've got friends who are stuck in roles where, they don't want to leave because they don't want to see it on their CV as if they leave too soon, and all these things. And I get it. We've all got commitments and stuff. And I remember also talking to a founder who'd set up a £1 billion evaluation business. And I remember, he was saying, like, Ross, we got to fail more. We got to do this more. And I was like, dude, like, I get it. Like, I get what you're saying. I get your words. But here's the thing. You've got people out there who've got to pay their rent. They've got to pay their mortgage. They might have families. They've got commitments. They can't fail, because the reality is they're not in control of that. If they fail, okay, they're going to get fired. So unless you take out that variable and say, we can fail, we're going to try fail, the reality is there is anxiety, and there's a huge amount of anxiety that comes out, and which is a huge area that I work on. But regardless of that, it's very easy for someone sitting there worth £1 billion, whatever, going, we've got to fail, we've got to try that. And if the leadership truly believes in that, and you've got that ground cover, keep it, go for it, keep that role as long as you can, because you're going to end up in roles at some stage in your career, I think, where you're not going to have that. You're going to end up in a company where people are just kind of going through the motions, and no one will ever say it. And they'll never tell you that. But a real product-led organization that is great, stay there as long as you can and maximize it, because I think just to finish off, it's having seen it work so well, where there's true empathy, humility, everybody's going, they are risking, they are doing all the best practices, and moving to a company that everybody says they're doing it. There's just a gulf and a world apart. So I'm sorry if some of that stuff sounds confrontational, but it's so hard to generalize. It's so important to just focus on the context, which comes with a lot of experience, I think.
Yeah, no, not at all. And also the point about failing and anxiety, and the context being completely different between $1 billion company who can afford to do that and actually, well, you might not be in that situation. For a while, I found that like quite contrived, and like failing has become such the buzzword now. And I feel like it's very off-putting. I think what it really translates to is you're trying to be as cheap as possible, so that you're not wasting resources, but it can make out as if, no, we have loads of margin for failure, like actual failure, which risks individual livelihoods. And it's not about that, but it's somehow being branded in that way. How you communicate that in different company cultures. I guess, context makes all the difference.
Cheers, well put. Sure.
Definitely. I feel most of the companies I've worked in, it's not about failing fast. It's just test it and get it right. and ship the product and make sure it's right, sort of thing. But you do kind of have that feeling of, I can't fail, even if it's a well-established product, or, it's a new product, but your market really well. You still have that fear. And I do feel like that anxiety is there. And I'm planning on doing an episode, watch out for it, guys, on imposter syndrome, which I feel as product managers, we must have experienced it at some point throughout our careers. But Ross, you say as product people, we love solving problems and you can't solve some, so you need to move on. But then another one of your lessons learned was obviously product management is vast and you need to know yourself. So if you might not necessarily have the skills for a startup compared to a larger organization.
Yeah. I guess what that real lesson is. I've worked with some people. I've worked with, say, let's think of a company with 40,000 people, and I'll be doing products, and I'll do something, and they'll, oh no, that will never work. But I could be at a startup, call the CEO and say, we got to try something this week, and we're going to do that, and they'll go, yeah, let's go for it. And what I'm trying to say is not whether a startup is better than a large company. It's not. Or a large company is not better than a startup. It's about what works for you as a person, right? There's some of us that are incredibly conscientious, that really like working with great teams, and everybody gets along, and they like the big team environment. There's security there. There's camaraderie there. There's a lot of potentially awesome people. There's some potentially not so awesome people, but a lot of people, love that. And I think that's great. And I think sometimes we kind of look at startups as if they're these kind of magical things. I'm trying to avoid using the word unicorn here. These magical things that like everything is just like, brilliant, and everything is just magical and it works out. It's not necessarily like that. I mean, a lot of the startups I've worked with, the amount of stress of thinking, we could run out of money at X, Y, and Z stage, or we've got a crazy founder who's now so charismatic and thinks, the sun shines out of where. It's, there's positives and negatives for each. And the fact is, one isn't necessarily better than the other. It depends on your personality type. There's some people who love, the startup world. They dig it. They dig the adrenaline and all that kind of stuff. There are other people who it just drives them nuts because, we've got strategy 1 this week, to next week is strategy 2, strategy 3 the week after that. And some people are like, that's great. We're pivoting all the time and we're just improving and getting better and better. And other people are going, listen, make up your mind. Like, what do you want? Do you want A, B, or C? Just tell me what you want. We'll deliver it. So I think the important thing when I was saying there about know yourself is, and I guess you got to kind of kiss a lot of frogs here, but again, if you're the kind of person that really thrives on stability, realize that there's certain ways to do product in really large companies, and they'll be very, very different in doing product in small companies. You'll say the same words. You'll still keep saying, like, we love customers, we put our customers, we're going to be data focused, and all these great things, these best practices. But the way that gets executed in a big company is much, much more different to the other one. To startups, and you just got to realize what your personality is. And if you're the kind of person who just really likes kind of taking it slow, but even at large companies, I mean, I've worked at large companies who think they're working incredibly fast, and I'm like, oh my god, like, we're having meetings about meetings, whereas at a startup they would laugh at that and go, that's just big corporate culture. But for some people that really works because there's clarity there's absolute kind of the ability to get things on board, get consensus, and a lot of people like that. So really, I'm just saying, and I guess 5 different ways is, it's not the one's better than the other, or one way to make product is better than the other. It's find out what works for you, you spoke about anxiety and imposter syndrome. Work at a company where you're not going to have that. If the people around you and supportive and emotionally intelligent and are real people, you're not going to get that, in my humble opinion, you're not going to get that imposter syndrome as badly, or let's leave out imposter syndrome. Let's say anxiety. You're not going to get that level of anxiety, maybe, if people are there and they're really supportive. And I don't think that's a startup or a big company. I think it's a culture with that particular company, and you just got to work out what works for you best.
Thanks, Ross, actually, about this. I was thinking about the startup world, corporate, medium. It's just like I thought about my last 15 years, and you're so right about that. And there are certain challenges at startup, and some people really hate it. So it's a really personal thing, as you're right. It might be chaotic, it might be really exciting. You make the decisions in maybe 5 minutes, whereas in a corporate organization, as you mentioned, it might take days, weeks, months as well. But at the same time, one of the things I generally do for myself is the first thing, as you mentioned, culture, and looking at the value set they have as a company, as a team. So is that in line with my values, and do I want to do that? Because in any product management role, you are given different responsibilities, really. I mean, it has been my experience, at least. Still, it's product focused, but you might be doing maybe more stakeholder management in a corporate organization, maybe less in startup, and maybe focusing on different aspects. So also it's maybe looking from the point of view, why would you like to focus on more, and would you like to do it more in that organization, in that product? That helped me to guide my both in the product management and different roles as well. So I definitely agree with you. It's a really important point, I think. Thanks for sharing.
Cheers for that. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. So I want to bring in Martin here. So we talked a little bit about soft skills. Ross was talking about that earlier, about how important it is as product people. But I wanted to ask you to explore neurodiversity and psychology within products and product management. What lessons learned do you want to discuss in those areas?
Yeah, so I'm an advocate for neurodiversity. I'm autistic. I have ADHD and dyspraxia. And I started making videos and talking on a lot of podcasts and everywhere really about the power of neurodiversity. So diversity as a whole, we already know that it helps with innovation and it makes financial sense. Now, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make a financial argument for neurodiversity specifically. That, hey guys, don't hire us because we're a charity case. Hire us because you will make more money. Very, very simply, if innovation is based on more and better ideas, if you put people in the room whose brains are structured differently, well, guess what? They're going to come up with very different ideas, and some of them could be the one that accelerate you away from the competition really far.
I did an episode for the Podbox, of course, episode 3, which is on bias and diversity in product management, and arguing for more diverse teams because it breeds that creativity, different ideas, collaborative environments, and discussed some of the examples out there in the wild, using AI, for example, where they don't think about colorblind people or think about people of color, and it affects the way that we use those products day to day and how important diversity is just broadly. I wanted to just go on to one of your lessons learned, Gauri, about the Holy Trinity. So treating design, engineering, commercial as a bit of a collaboration. How have you sort of learned that lesson in your product management journey?
Yeah, well, whatever you want to call it, like bread and butter, holy grail. Also, kind of related and picking up on what Martin said, absolutely 100, 1000% agree. And I find it interesting because in products, as product people, we often like hold workshops, and it's amazing that I think if we haven't got it as a company, we do it as proxy. We invite different people from different areas of the business, engineering, design, kind of representation to these meetings because we think it's going to be of value. Like, why do we do that? And yes, they work in different functions and we need that insight, but also I think it's by having different minds around the table. So we do that by proxy anyway. I wish that companies were more forthwith with it. So collaboration with design, engineering, and commercial. I think, like, if we start first at a place of like understanding and agreeing that in a company, product sits at the crux of design or UX, engineering, and business. Like, people talk about collaboration for days, yet it still remains in part a mystery. And going back to context, which we've just been talking about, that makes all the difference. The type of company you're in, the industry even, like the lay of the land of what type of stakeholders you need to collaborate with is always different. But interestingly, depending on how your product function is formed, say if you're taking the Spotify squad kind of model, which is what we had at Moonpig and what we have at the BBC, so where a product team is formed of a dedicated designer, perhaps one or maybe a couple more, engineers, and then a product manager, sometimes some other roles like business analyst and agile coach. But those kind of core roles, out of those three stakeholder channels, two of them, design and engineering, are actually your very own teammates. But you might just have one designer, actually a great number of engineers, and then business, like the commercial, is abstracted away from you. And even within that, it could be sub-split into your brand and marketing team, trade, sales, and whatnot. At Moonpig, then there was also the fulfillment, like the factory side of things. So that is interesting. It makes for like a complex stakeholder landscape. And clearly what's going to be a winning formula for how you collaborate well with one isn't going to work with everyone else. So I don't think I really have the perfect way to kind of like wrap this up, but going back to, we're experimental in our work, like in our practice, but also in how we like collaborate with these different stakeholder channels. And I suppose almost by virtue of actually being very early into product management, and I sort of was naturally in a place where I accepted that I need to be guided more and not taking for granted that actually the way I was doing things was the best way. That gave a lot of grace room for trying out new things. But I think fundamentally, like one kind of top theme lesson within that is getting to know your stakeholder behaviors. And like collaboration always comes down to people, of course, and there are like the known cliches, but also like the not so obvious nuances. And I think you can be easy to kind of put on yourself like the fear that to get on with your stakeholders, you need to be like them. I mean, like I'm somebody who, when I kind of walk into a room, I'm often explicitly very different to everyone else, but I don't think it's about that. And one thing which kind of was like a turning point for me was, you may have heard of it, but this kind of mental model framework called Lumina Spark. It's a professional toolkit for associating colors with different psychometric characteristics of people. Now, I don't really like kind of pigeonholing into, oh, you're an introvert and extrovert, like yet another pigeonhole. But this one I'm quite a fan of because it makes it just sort of transparent in how people approach things. And luckily, one of our people team at Moonpig actually held a workshop on this. And they, at the end of it, they kind of asked a powerful question as part of an exercise, which was, think of somebody who you work with closely, but you don't necessarily get along very well with them. Now, what kind of colour do you think they are, like luminous spark colour, and how does that compare to you? And you kind of learn about that it's not just about being one colour, like red, people who like to be very, very direct, or say blue people who like to approach things very analytically. But people, like we're all on the spectrum, but we can particularly index on one than another. And sometimes that creates clash if you index in the same area or if you're opposite. And suddenly I was sort of thinking about different people who work around me. And like it just made sense, their approach away in their ways of doing things. And for me, like I've helped, I mean, hasn't been the only thing, but it's been one vivid scenario that has helped me to just being more empathetic to how people are, rather than thinking, oh, I wish they weren't like that. Just sort of rolling with it and playing into it, like playing to other people's strengths, and just simply, like age-old advice, just not taking things too personally. So that's kind of one area. And I feel particularly that is also powerful with like your business stakeholders who are naturally more abstracted away from you. So with your teammates, you can learn that very fast because you're with them on a day-to-day basis. But I found that with my commercial stakeholders, I was kind of further away. And like one kind of powerful lesson was just about, and I think Jamie mentioned this, like giving people clarity and that scope. Like related to that, sometimes like with internal stakeholders, people can be very easily jaded. Like, oh, we have this way of doing things. They have their way of doing things. But I found that it's always down to like lack of understanding. And I feel like there's nothing more powerful than enabling people to feel empowered and equipped, that they know exactly what's going on and they can make their own decisions with that. And I think as a product person, because you're at that crux between those different functions, one of the best things you can be is to be that like non-technical bridge, particularly for your commercial partners, to understand what's going on, not feeling patronized by language, and just like as Nikki says, like keeping it simple. That's really helped. And there were amazing times when I didn't quite realize this was making an impact, but suddenly it would kind of come to light when people, say commercial stakeholders, clearly understood like underlying algorithms and stuff that we are building with our data science teams and using it to solve their own problems, and then coming to chat with us like, oh, could this work, for quite like a big challenge that we had on our hands. And like from then on onwards, like you could tell that really it just boils down to simple things like that, just wanting to understand, and like adapting your communication style, which as a product person, going back to like being a startup, like you're constantly having to pitch to different audiences and about kind of experimenting with that. But also, sorry, I'm going to like reference back to startups quite a lot because they have been my inspiration. And in a way, because I wasn't a product manager in that scenario, there was quite a benefit of being like at a bird's eye view, witnessing. And so I kind of use what I observed a lot of those different startup product teams as like my data points. Whereas sometimes when you're in it, you can kind of lose sight. But say like in a company, I think that the product person should be like on your best behavior, almost as if you're outside of the company. There's something about like if you're internal, there are certain problems that come with it. Whereas imagine you're like a fledgling startup and you have to be humble. You have to not be defensive and just take on board feedback, because ultimately it's going to help you. It's going to give clues about how you can improve. You have to bend towards others, so that you can help them understand what you are doing and what your value is, so that they get you. Like you just have to like bring yourself down to that level. And I think as a product person, if you kind of take on board that and take a hard look at yourself and your ways, it just makes everything so much better. I suppose like I feel like I could go on about this as well, but then engineering is engineering design, which are like your direct teammates. That is, I find that just fascinating in general. But like I think that a lot of that stems from the presence of like trust and empowerment, which kind of stems to what was said earlier about the feeling of like why and motivation. But like one kind of classic pitfall I think we fall into is particularly our relationship with engineers. So you might have one designer on the one hand, but many engineers. And as a product manager, sometimes you can feel outnumbered. And I feel like nothing comes more to show that than when you're in retrospectives. And it's sort of, and sometimes things can feel a bit confrontational. But I've seen this in several places where people seem to have this notion that keep engineers happy by letting them code all day, like giving them milk and cookies, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. And I found that everyone needs that involvement, like in the wider purpose, why we're doing things, and amazingly, like getting engineers involved in like video reels, sound bites from real customers about what they're saying, pairing up with designers regularly, sometimes having a representation with, from them in commercial meetings, really builds up that collaboration and that kind of collective team purpose.
I think absolutely 100 million%, just on the point that you just made with engineering teams being far removed from the commercials of the product. I think it works to the detriment of the success of your product, because they need to really be at the forefront and realize, what benefits the product is delivering, the direction of the product. They need to be part of the process. It's not sort of a team in a dark room that builds something, delivers it, and then they don't see the results of or the fruits of their labor, rather. And I think teams really should be included and not far removed from it, because it helps if they're included and feel included in the process and have the feeling of collaboration and working together with design, working together with the commercial teams, and bending towards others. You mentioned as a product manager, and not feeling scared as well to talk to engineering teams, ask questions. I think Nikki mentioned earlier, ask questions, just question, even with your technical teams, because product managers generally aren't technical people, but sometimes they are, I think, but most times maybe not, depending on where they've kind of entered in product management from. But you just have to ask the questions. If you don't understand something, you just have to kind of lay yourself bare and say, hey, look, I don't understand this, but I want to. And that just helps your relationship. It helps with the collaboration. It helps with your communication with the teams, and it builds that trust, which is what you mentioned as well earlier, Gary. Just to touch on, bending towards others and embracing feedback, because it's one of Jamie, you mentioned that in one of your lessons learned is key to do that, to embrace feedback. Do you want to touch on that more as part of your lessons learned in product management?
Thanks, listener. Feedback. I think I built my whole reputation or my whole career based on feedback. Even from when I was a QA to when I was a product owner to constant feedback on personally on your own development, plus on the product level. So working from different angles, you have different ways to get feedback, be from your sprint planning, whatever the case is. That's a way of giving feedback. Also doing agile customer groups, so whatever the case is, to customers, get that feedback. Doing surveys, you get feedback. I think for every stage, especially like if you're in a startup, it's very essential to get that feedback early. So when you're trying to understand what your MVPs are, you need to go pitch to customers, say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. You get the feedback, and then you translate that into your requirements, and that requirements come into what you actually want to build out. So getting feedback at every turn, for me, it's my must thing. I must do in every organization I've worked in. I think getting feedback is essential, and it's a way to just make sure that you're on a regular basis, you're touching base with your customers and making them feel included in your decisions, because once they feel that their feedback is coming into their suggestions are coming into what you're building, they're more willing to work with you over a period of time. So they would definitely want to be part of the whole process of whatever you're building. And even in bigger organizations as well, because in larger organizations like the ones I'm in at the moment, a lot of times customers feel they're being left out, and getting that opportunity for them to get their feedback in and get their thoughts in on a regular basis, encourages them. It gives them a lease of life towards the business, because they don't feel they're just a small customer in the whole big juggernaut that's this company or whatever the case is, and they don't feel like they're being left out. So getting feedback on a regular basis, and even with the teams, as we were just talking about engineering teams, getting feedback from your engineering teams on different aspects of what they're building out, because sometimes you have a great idea of what you want, and if you don't get the feedback from the team that are actually going to build it, it feels like they're not being listened to, or they're not contributing enough to what the product is going to look like, and that could be demoralizing to them. So I think feedback is essential at every aspect of it, be it even at the stakeholders or levels. So you could have it from my own perspective, where I am. You can even get feedback from the owners of the business, rather than just even internally, on a certain direction of how you're going to move the product forward, because they have their own ideas of what they want you to do, for example. And then you can use that in your day-to-day activities to steer your product in the right way. Feedback is good. It can be good, and it also can be bad. You can get so much feedback where if you start questioning actually what you're trying to achieve. But as I said before, about having a clear vision of what you're doing. Once you have those feedback, you align it to your vision and make sure at every point that it's in line. And then if it's in line, then basically you can break it down into the different deliverables of how you want to do stuff, so that you know what you're going to push out to the market, how it's going to happen. And every department, every stakeholder from different departments, be it marketing, sales, everyone wants to be included in how a product is being developed. So that feedback you get from them on a regular basis I think it's part of the lifeline of a product manager. You must get feedback, and you must embrace it, negative or positive. I'll give an example of the last company I worked in, where I did a product demo, and we've been developing this thing for a couple of months or 6, and we did it it's a quite technical product. It was for cybersecurity, and we did it to the installation team. Basically, they're the technical architects and stuff, and we did it to presentation, and the feedback was horrendous. Talking about how we weren't listening to what they wanted, and we went one direction. But because of that feedback, we took that information, understood where they were coming from, and it was a quick turnover. And it basically, some of it was good, some of it was constructive, some was just people wanted to whine, and you can't do anything about that. But at that point in time, once you get the information from those people, you collate it, then you can start picking apart what are the good points that are there, how you're going to implement those points, how you're going to change the product rapidly before it goes to the market, so that it meets the customer's needs. So I think on a regular basis, feedback for me is essential. You must have it, you must do it. And if you don't do it, you're just going down a dark alley without really getting any information, and then you come out and people don't like what you have there. So yeah, feedback.
Absolutely, Jamie. And also, feedback can come about really surprising things. Like you think, oh, I want feedback specifically about this, but sometimes it can be about really kind of unexpected things, which it just made me think of how in an engineering team that I once worked with, I actually got feedback that they wanted to be really experimental with their ways of working, with the detail of with their day-to-day ways of working. They wanted to experiment with this very kind of modern extreme programming way of working, so pairing, even mobbing, so 3 engineers sometimes, or even 4 working on one ticket, which higher managers above sort of flipped about at the sound of. But that made such a difference. It was basically life-changing to the way how we worked, and then going back to trust, like trusting them to work in this way and seeing how it goes just enormously helped us when the going went tough. And I feel like every product team here has experienced when the pandemic hit. This hit us in so many different ways, and that brought about whole new challenges. But yeah, feedback can also be about surprising things as well as also not receiving great feedback.
Yeah, definitely. You've hit it on the head, nail on the head. Yeah, definitely. You will get all sorts of feedback, and a lot of great ideas come back from feedback. New things you never thought of come in, and you can use it in your product. So yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to loop in Martin on the feedback discussion, because one of Martin's lessons learned is continuous product discovery. And obviously, as part of continuous product discovery is feedback.
Yeah, of course. So when is a product done? Is the Google search engine done? A lot of the products just keep on going, right? Unless it's a startup or a product that reached the end of its life cycle. So we're always developing. So yes, there are two main activities in product, discovery and delivery. But if you're thinking about it, let me just do a little discovery and then I will just keep delivering for the next half year to a year, then you're not actually going to take into account all that precious feedback that is coming in. So what's really important is doing discovery and delivery at the same time. It's called many names, dual track agile, or you can call it however you like. But the point is that in every single sprint you do, it's really important to try to gain clarity on things that you're not sure about, to continuously test in various different ways and feed that in to the delivery process itself. Involve your whole team, involve someone from engineering and from product design as well, to make sure that you get different perspectives. And also it helps to create alignment. It's one of the main arguments in the separating the product manager versus product owner roles itself is, well, actually, how do you communicate? If one person is talking to the customer, the other is talking to the engineers, then how do you create that all desired clarity and communication? This just further destroys what people are trying to build, like product people, all that clarity to help us align to the vision and really build something. So if instead of this, you're doing discovery continuously and you're involving the whole team, then what you're going to get is improved clarity, and a lot of the times you're going to build things with a lot more confidence. I'm not saying you're always going to build everything that works. If you're doing that, then, well, at least in the testing phase, if you're just testing safe things, you're never going to innovate big. But this will help engineers only code things that actually matter, that people will use and will make a positive business impact. Because that's what all we're trying to create here, value for the customer and for the business. So yeah, do discovery continuously and feed it into the delivery process. And that's kind of, for me, is the unlimited life cheat in one of these games. If you're always doing it, if you always create clarity, if you always understand and make sure that what you're building will deliver value and you know how, it's a lot more difficult to fail.
Yeah, obviously, absolutely, definitely agree with that. And I feel like the designer is particularly important in that process. Continuous discovery happens throughout the day as well as over a period of time. One of the best things, particularly working virtually, was just literally, rather than having hour blocks of discovery sessions with your research and design team, literally just picking up the phone and having 5 to 10 minute conversations, sometimes spontaneously, but sometimes even in the calendar, literally wedged in between all the different meetings that you have. And like also what Nikki said about like being like a child, which helps with curiosity and continuous discovery. Like constantly picking up insights that you pick up from around the business or what you know, and sharing that like in an unfiltered way, and actually deferring to your discovery experts. For me, I didn't really find myself as like the discovery expert. I saw the designers more as that, like being able to piece things together. Yes, we had ping pong a lot, but kind of actually looking up to them, being like a child, just saying exactly what you know in an unfiltered way. That really, really accelerated good quality discovery. Sorry.
Yeah, Gauri, I completely agree. I think in the discovery phase, having that communication and getting the different perspective from the different areas of, you might not even think of getting input from, and suddenly you have this great idea coming in or this great requirement coming in from the most unexpected space. I think that's what is also quite exciting from time to time. And also, if during the discovery phase, you're not going to find the treasure if you don't search for it. So it's constantly digging to find uh, uh, what you want to achieve at the end of the day, and what keeping your vision in mind and trying to get to that, and work towards that at the end of the day. That's what matters.
Yeah, so well put.
Fantastic. So, to round it up, does anybody have any other kind of lessons learned that they'd like to share, takeaways for our audience, tips, points that our fellow product audience would benefit from?
Yeah, actually, in terms of like I was going to add to continuous discovery, I'm a fan of the continuous discovery as well. And one of the things we've been discussing about product centered decisions and feedback loop, I think one of the things is it's great to have feedback internally. Definitely, it's really valuable. We are working with experienced people, really passionate people. But at the same time, sometimes, and from one of my actually takeaways from my background is that sometimes I don't know if this happens to other product managers as well. We might fall into the trap of testing things internally and let's get out and let's test it outside once we build products. But my personal advice there is actually testing with the real users as well, because we are not our customers. We might have great insight. We might be really customer centric. People who work, the stakeholders might be really mindful of what we are doing, but still we are not falling into the customers, and we are also biased as well because we see the product every single day inside out. So it's just really important to have that continuous discovery with our existing customers and having that cycle, not just as an iteration, but really continuously doing it as if you can do it as a dual track agile. I know sometimes it's challenging in some organizations, but and finding what really works for you, for your team, for your product, because wherever you go, whatever you do, you might need to shift the ways you're working or change and tailor the things that you learned before. And the best way to do is I find retrospectives really useful for these purposes, to have that open conversations with the team, with even stakeholders, involving stakeholders, to really talk about what's working, what's not really working, and how can we really create great products that actually work best for our customers. So that's actually my kind of like little addition to all of these things. And thank you so much for everyone. It's been amazing for me to listen to your experiences as well. Definitely lots of things learned, and thanks Lucinda for actually having all of us here today, and it's been really valuable. Thank you.
I just want to say, listening to everyone throughout this conversation, I think everyone's lessons learned is something that is so relatable for me as a product person. And when everyone's speaking about the lesson learned, I find myself going like, yes, that is so true. And how they all kind of tie in together, from being curious and keeping it simple to where you need to tailor a process or a product to make it work for your environment, and also know your why, having that communication and keeping the vision in mind the whole time. All these bits and pieces tie in perfectly well. So I think great topics overall, and a learning for me just as much from everyone's side.
I'd love to echo that as well. I've learned so much this evening. It's been really great to hear everyone's different lessons and from varied experiences and contexts. It seems like also a clear theme is that like context matters, and continuously learning, being willing to listen and take on feedback and learn upon that. I always think that like the team is the crux of it. That is not such thing as being a great product manager. Similar to you can be right or you can make money. I think it's like you can be a great product manager or you can have a high performing product team. It's all about the team, and that is the result, the former. And actually caring about the day-to-day devil in the details, like what matters to your team members, what works well in terms of approach in your collaboration, down to your stakeholders understanding, like have you got the exact like the right appropriate scope. Thank you so much, Lucinda. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, so if you want to accelerate your career, be brave, take bold steps, and hire a coach to accelerate the process. If you want to accelerate the product itself, then do continuous discovery and hire diverse people, especially neurodiverse.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you for having us.
Thank you, Martin. And I just want to add, guys, let's just enjoy this. Enjoy product management. Product management is fun. Life is too short. If you are not having fun where you are, if you are not enjoying where you are, if you don't like the product, you don't like the team, if you don't fit in, as Ross said earlier, sometimes you just need to move on. And I think it's really important, absolutely try your best to learn the product, get a feel of it, get a feel of the product team, and try and see if it's for you. But if it's not for you, take it and move on. And I think Gary's point earlier on the high performing product teams, that is something that I pride myself on, and it's really important to me. And that's one of the most important things I think of in an environment is the product team and the product people in that team, and ensuring the team is diverse and ensuring there's collaborative working and we're sharing experiences, because a lot of my teams work on different products. So, having them come together and talk about lessons learned within their own products as well to help internally the product managers avoid pitfalls that other product managers or product owners have experienced is definitely key. Have fun. And I really just want to kind of end by thanking you all for joining me on this panel episode, my first panel episode. It's been really, really good to hear all of your lessons learned, and I hope that anyone listening to this has learned from it. But thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you soon. Thanks all. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and please share with others who may find it interesting or useful. And don't forget, you can subscribe to our mailing list at thepodbox.co.uk and join the conversation on Instagram or Twitter at thepodbox. See you on the other side.